How's it going, everybody? In this video, we're going to be talking about some actions that the state of California is taking through the legislative process. And what they are trying to do is amend the assault weapons definition here in the state through AB 88. And also they are trying to push forward the deadline for the Firearms Precursor Law, which was passed. Before we jump into this video, I want to thank one of the sponsors of the channel, USCCA. If you're not familiar with USCCA, they provide carry insurance for people who conceal carry. So if you're interested in looking at something like that, I'll go ahead and put a link in the comment as well as put a link in the details. So in this video, I'm going to cover not only what has happened this last week in regards to AB 88, but also I'm going to be talking about what exactly the law does in regards to the assault weapons language change and also the firearms precursor laws changes that it's trying to implement. So first, let's talk about what exactly AB 88 is trying to do. Now, AB 88 and how it has been amended is it's essentially a budget committee trailer bill. But in this budget committee trailer bill, what they have done is they've added some firearms policy in it as well. First, what it does is it tries to expand the definition of assault weapon to include the Title I firearm, which is being manufactured and is attempting to be sold by Franklin Armory. Also, what they're attempting to do with the amendment to AB 88 is push forward the deadline for firearms precursor parts. So first, let's look at the definition or the expansion of the definition of assault weapons that AB 88 is trying to attempt, because that's the main thing that everybody is really upset about and which I'm upset about. So the current language for an assault weapon is defined in California Penal Code section 30515. And there are multiple parts to that, as you guys are familiar with. There's a 1 and a 2. And what this 1 and 2 do is it essentially has set the standard for what assault weapons are, being a semi-automatic centerfire rifle that has a detachable magazine, but it can't have specific features, which has led us to create featureless rifles. And then there is another section, part 2, which has to do with fixed magazine rifles that cannot have more than 10 rounds, but you can have those other features on it, and that has led to fixed magazine rifles. The Franklin Armory Title I or these other firearms do not fall within the definitions of an assault weapon under this specific section, and therefore they are not considered assault weapons. But what AB 88 is attempting to do through essentially a physical budget is expand and change the definition of what an assault weapon is. So specifically, let's look at the language of what they are trying to implement through AB 88 for the expanded assault weapon language. Essentially what it is the bill is seeking to expand the definition of an assault weapon to include a semi-automatic firearm that is not a rifle, pistol, or shotgun that either does not have a fixed magazine but has any one of the attributes currently associated with assault weapons, as specified, that has a fixed magazine with a capacity to accept more than 10 rounds, or that has an overall length of less than 30 inches. This bill would provide an exception to the prohibition on processing an assault weapon that is not a rifle, pistol, or shotgun if the person lawfully possessed the firearm prior to July 1st, 2020, and registers the weapon in January 1st, 2022. So what they are doing is they're saying we are going to expand the language to a firearm that is not a rifle, not a pistol, not a shotgun, that has specific characteristics to it. We are going to make those firearms an assault weapon. We are going to essentially amend and expand the language in the state of California to encompass these types of firearms. And then what the bill also says is we are going to consider those an assault weapons, but we are going to grandfather in anyone who has possession of these specific firearms that are assault weapons, and we are going to require them to register them with the California Department of Justice. So as you can see, this is a major and huge deal, not only because it affects the Franklin Armory Title I with all the other things that they have going on right now where they are directly suing the California Department of Justice for them essentially not updating their DOJ DROS drop-down system. Also with the mass action lawsuit that I brought to your guys' attention. I know a lot of you went ahead and put a deposit down to Franklin Armory, but there's a lot of stuff going on. And now we have the California legislator expressly trying to amend the statutory language to cover these types of firearms and make them assault weapons and pretty much prohibit individuals from getting our hands on it. So this really just signals what the whole process was. We can now see that the reason they didn't update the DROS system is because they intended to do this all along. Next, let's look at the firearms precursor language that is going to be changed through AB 88. I have a prior video on my channel talking about the firearms precursor law, and it was put out prior to that. It was actually written into law, and I was saying, hey, we got to get ahead of this, but ultimately it was signed into law, and that was AB 879. Now, AB 879, there's a lot of confusion about it. A lot of people are saying that a firearms precursor part includes things like a barrel, a trigger, magazines, stuff like that. And where that confusion comes from is there was a prior bill that was very similar trying to target firearms precursors laws, but that prior bill, it was AB 2382. And that bill's definition of a firearms precursor law extended to things like barrel, magazines, trigger groups, stuff like that. So a lot of people are saying, well, AB 879, which was passed into law, also covers those items. But that is not correct. Under AB 879 and also AB 88, what a firearms precursor part is it is pretty much an 80% lower, or any of those 80%. That is what the firearms precursor part is primarily targeting. But also why this is such a big deal, because with AB 879, which was the original language for a firearms precursor part, and now AB 88, which is the amendment to that, what they're trying to do is they are trying to require a firearms precursor vendor license. And so think of what we have to do right now with ammunition, where you have to go through a licensed vendor to purchase ammunition. They have to run a background of sorts or a check with the DOJ. The DOJ has to approve it, and then you can take possession of that ammunition. That is exactly what they're trying to do with this firearms precursor part language. You have to go through a licensed vendor, and it goes to the DOJ for the check, and then you can take possession of those items. And why AB 88 is such a big deal is not only because it has that assault weapons definition change, but also what they're trying to do with this specific part with the precursor part is they are trying to push forward that requirement, which was originally set as July 1st, 2024. They are trying to push it forward to July 1st, 2022. So it is going to limit the amount of time that we have to get our hands and be able to possess these specific items that are going to be affected by this language. So as of this week, there have pretty much been 3 primary events that have happened. And with each event, there's been a lot of misinformation. So let's talk about each one. So the first thing that really was brought to my attention, and which I blasted out to you guys, and I wanted a lot of engagement from you guys, and I have to thank everybody who really engaged with this, had to do with the budget committee essentially hearing these specific issues of AB 88. So Wednesday, the Senate Budget Committee, pretty much late into the night, heard the issue of AB 88. So what happened is, essentially when it was brought up for discussion, there was some pretty lively debate between the representatives in the Budget Committee on what exactly this is doing. And a lot of the representatives, including some Democratic representatives, were really concerned about this policy language in regards to assault weapons being put in a physical budget. A lot of them were questioning the committee who drafted this. What exactly are you trying to target? What are these firearms? Can you explain it to us? And what we actually saw is when they brought this up, the individuals who wrote it couldn't answer. And what they did is they ended up taking a recess, and then all the statespeople scrambled to try to figure out what exactly they were trying to do with this bill and what exactly these firearms are. And then when they came back from the recess, it was brought back up, this AB 88, and then they discussed what exactly these firearms are. And it was really a piss poor explanation of what exactly these Franklin Armory Title I is, or what other firearms are, and what exactly they're trying to do with this expanded language. It was just a really bad explanation. And what we actually heard from not only the committee, but all their representatives, is that they went out and pretty much Googled. And I don't know if they watched some of my videos, or maybe Reno May's videos, or I don't know if they just read general articles, but they were pretty much just saying they Googled stuff. They had no idea what was going on with this language, and actually got a ton of pushback because of this. And I know they also got a lot of pushback when it came to public comments. They got a lot of calls about AB 88, but despite this, they still passed and they still approved the AB 88 language. Now, after that, I saw a ton of posts of people saying, well, the law's in effect. We have until July 1st. Try to get your Title I if you can right now, yada, yada, yada. This is horrible. And so what I actually did is, because I saw a lot of stuff on the California gun Reddit, I went ahead and put a chart explaining the legislative process, and maybe I'll even put it in this video as well so you can see kind of how this played out. But I was confused of why everybody was putting out videos and why everybody was commenting about, well, this was passed, it's 100% passed, this is a law right now, when that was not the fact. All it did is it passed the budget committee, and then it went forward to the Senate, and it was waiting Senate approval. And so what happened the next day, it then went to the Senate floor for their approval. And again, when it was at the Senate floor, we saw a lot of debate about this. And actually in the Senate floor, there was a lot of debate about some other things that were also incorporated into AB 88, which had to do with shortening prison sentences, closing down prisons, a lot of criminal justice reform. But we saw on the Senate floor, again, was they brought up, well, can you explain what exactly this language and this change of definition to an assault weapon, what is it going to do? What are these firearms? And we saw a Democratic representative who was also on the committee budget. She tried to explain what exactly this was, and she just said, oh, it's an assault weapon, it's an assault weapon, we got to ban these things, they're horrible. That was pretty much her explanation. No one really could explain what exactly these firearms are because they have no idea what these firearms are. They don't understand the assault weapons language in the state of California. They don't understand anything about firearms. So again, there was lively debate, but ultimately it was passed by the Senate floor as well, and it would proceed on. Now, even after this, I saw a lot of people posting about, well, you know, the Senate, the floor passed it, it's going to become law, it's going to Newsom's desk, he's going to sign it. And again, this is why I hesitated in putting out a video, because I understood that this process is still playing out. So what actually happened, contrary to what people were saying, where it was going to go to Gavin Newsom's desk and he was just going to sign off it, which I do believe if this ever makes it to Gavin Newsom's desk, he will just sign off on it, because we've seen him do that before. With last year, he signed 19 gun control things just with the stroke of his pen. We've seen him do that, but there is a process for it to get on his desk. But what happened is, since this was an amendment by the Senate, when it reached the Senate, they're the ones who amended the language. Once it went through the Senate committee, once it went through the Senate floor, and both of those Senate parts approved it, it has to go back to the Assembly because the amendments were made by the Senate, and the Assembly has to approve those amendments. And so this happened yesterday, and I was waiting and I was listening for a better part of the day to hear them address AB 88 and try to figure out if the Assembly was actually going to approve the amendments that the Senate had done in regards to AB 88. And I think this went missed by a lot of people because I didn't see a whole lot of discussion about this. And I was commenting to people, I was responding to people, I was sending emails out to people who were asking me, well, you know, the Assembly's hearing this, but I didn't see them do anything. I didn't see a vote on AB 88. And so there was a really quick blurb in between a break where essentially the Democratic majority representative came up and had a motion. And what his motion was, he sought a motion for a unanimous decision to send AB 88 back to the Senate. And the motion went unopposed by the Republican side, I believe. And so essentially, AB 88 was not voted on by the Assembly. It was sent back to the Senate, I guess, to reconsider the language. I think that there was a lot of fear, and because there was a lot of response, maybe by us, and by a lot of other individuals who were concerned about the closing of the prisons, about the changes in crime policy, there was a lot of concern about this specific bill, and so I think they just decided to put a hold on it and send it back to the Senate. So as we stand right now, AB 88 is not law. It is not our current law we are operating under. Right now, there is no deadline for you to have to buy the Franklin Armory Title I or convert something within that July 1st. Now, I don't know if they're going to go back and amend that deadline language when it goes back to the Senate. I don't know if they're going to completely remove the language. I don't know the specifics of why the Assembly floor decided to send it to the Senate. It might be targeted just to the closing of prisons and crime policy. It might have nothing to do with the assault weapons language expansion or the firearms precursor. They might not change that at all, but it might have something to do with that. They might completely eliminate that language. They might change the deadline even if they do decide to pass it, because July 1st is coming up here within just a few days. So one of the things that I really want to emphasize is, and what I emphasize on Reddit and what I emphasize when I was having discussions with you guys, is this fight is not over. Do not just assume because one committee or the Senate or the Assembly through these multiple phases is approving it that the fight is over, we throw up our arms and we give up. I kept telling you guys, we're still in this fight. Contact your representatives, contact the committee floors, contact the Assembly, contact your senators, contact everybody and let them know that you don't approve of this. Let your friends know who might want to oppose this. Let everybody know. And I really think that maybe this had a big impact because there was a lot of discussion On this specific issue with the language expansion and the firearms precursor stuff, there was discussion about it and some lively discussion and a lot of pushback on this. I appreciate you guys being patient with me and me putting out this video. And like I said, my goal was to be able to give you guys the most accurate information. So hopefully this helped educate you guys on what exactly is going on with AB 88. So if you found this video helpful and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways I think right now you can do that is I recently came out with some new channel apparel. It came highly requested by you guys. This includes shirts, sweaters, stickers, mugs, stuff like that. You can find a link in the details. And also you can find there should be a bar somewhere here that will send a link to that apparel. So if you would like to pick some up for yourself and support the channel, that's a great way to do it. So as always, thanks you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, a nation that draws a great distinction between its scholars and its warriors will have its laws run by cowards and its wars fought by fools.